The new Boost Mobile network is offering unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for life.
That sounds like a threat.
Then how do you think we should say it?
Unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for the rest of your life?
I don't know.
Until your ultimate demise.
What if we just say forever?
Okay.
$25 a month, forever.
Get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile forever.
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Hey Prime members, are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hello and welcome to episode number 265 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Zia Wolf, Morgan Bennett, Joy Rudder, Natalie Tung, and Karen. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week, our film review is The Tunnel. The Tunnel was released in 2011. It has 5.8 out of 10 on IMDb and 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. I will say that 100% comes from 7 reviews, but it has 50% in the user reviews, right? So there's a big old disparity there, and I wanted to point that out. An investigation into a government cover-up leads to a network of abandoned train tunnels deep beneath the heart of Sydney. As a journalist and her crew hunt for the story, it quickly becomes clear that the story is hunting them. Now, as always with these horror films, we're going to do likes and dislikes, and we're going to start with our likes. Now, I love a low-budget, independent, found footage horror film. That is an aspect of the genre that I love, because I also feel like the confines of budget means that you need to be clever and subtle in how you create the horror. And if you've been listening for a long time, you know that one of my bugbears is lazy Hollywood horror. Lazy Hollywood jump scares, when they've put no thought into how to create an atmosphere or how to create a sense of anxiety without just showing you the monster on screen. For example, the use of loud music that is superfluous to the plot of the story or superfluous to the action that's happening on stage to create a jump scare. That's lazy. I don't like it. I'm not here for it. Give me subtlety. Give me somebody who has about a tenner to make a film, and they use that tenner wisely. And this is one of those films. Is this film going to blow your mind and change your life? No. But can you appreciate it for an independent found footage horror film? Yes, you can. It's decent. Okay, it's definitely decent. And I really liked the premise for this story. So essentially there is a water shortage in Sydney, and under the city there are all these underground tunnels that have been used for various things over the years, like bomb shelters. They've been used for soldiers, and there is this big reservoir, this big lake of water under the city that's like 1 kilometre long. The government are like, we're going to use it to alleviate the water shortage. And then they're like, actually, let's pretend we never said that. So these investigators are like, something is wrong here. Something is amiss. And they start looking into it, and they find out that, there's homeless people who live down the tunnels and some of them have gone missing. Right? That's a decent premise. That's a decent setup. I'm here for it. I want to know why these homeless people are going missing. Is there like a serial killer living under the tunnels? Is there a monster? Is there a creature? What is it? And for those of you who are listening to this and you're thinking, I just can't do found footage, I can't do the shaky camera. It makes me feel nauseated. This is not motion sickness inducing. Yes, it's found footage. Yes, it's all on handheld cameras, but they are like a TV crew, right? So their footage isn't shaky. It's not like Cloverfield or the Blair Witch, where for some people that motion sickness effect happens, right? So you're in the clear if that's something that you have reservations about with a found footage horror film. And in this story, there's so much ambiguity, which fundamentally I like. I always really liked Cloverfield, and that utilised the same thing. You don't know what's happening. The people who are involved don't know what's happening. So we don't get any exposition. We don't get 100 years ago this happened in the tunnels and therefore we now have this stuff that's happening today. No, you get none of that. You'll have loads of questions that may not be answered, and that's actually okay. And of course, from an instant gratification, curiosity perspective, I want to know all of the answers. I want to know exactly what was happening and why. But, sometimes it's good not to be spoon-fed everything in a film. And I'm going to say one last thing about my likes, okay? I liked the antagonist. I don't want to say much more than that because I don't want to give anything away in terms of the story and the film. But I liked the antagonist. And I appreciated and respected the fact that we actually saw very little of the antagonist because it meant that you had to create your own narrative about the antagonist and what the antagonist is and what the antagonist wants. And now on to our dislikes, right? It's been a long time since I've hated a character as much as I hated the woman in this story. She is meant to be the protagonist, I think. And I'm just going to say it. If you're in a dark tunnel underground under the city where the most effective way to stay out of harm's way in the dark is to stay silent, then when you are wailing and screaming incessantly at any given opportunity, I am going to sacrifice you. I'm going to say, for the good of the group, I am shoving you in harm's way and I am running out of there while you are being slowly devoured. And I always say that I like to have my horror characters nuanced. Nobody in the world is just good or just bad. But this character was so deeply unlikable that I found it so hard to connect with her motives. I found it so hard to connect with her as a character. There, like I said, there is a bit where she is literally sitting on the ground wailing and screaming. And I'm like, you're going to get everybody murdered. Everybody's going to be killed and it's going to be your fault. She wrecked my vibes. I honestly, if I was there with her, I would have been like, you know what? I'm going to make an executive decision and we're getting rid of you because you are actively dangerous and very annoying. It is also quite slow. All found footage films have the cursory build-up. I get it. It's fine. We need to know about the characters. We need to know about how we've ended up here. But this was a slow burn and I don't think there was enough of a payoff. I think they needed to intersperse more clips of strange little things happening in with the build-up. And they did these talking head interviews with the characters in a documentary style, which, the talking head interviews were taking place after the events in the tunnels. And I just sort of felt a bit like those talking head interviews were fillers to fill time, rather than them actually enhancing the story very much. Some of the talking head moments were important for expositionary reasons, but sometimes I was just like, I don't really care what you have to say right now. Let's get back to the tunnels. Let's get back to the running and screaming. And as with all found footage films, I feel like the last 10 minutes of running around and panicking annoyed me. I appreciate being limited in your budget means that you have to get creative. But again, it felt like filler. There was a lot of running down dark corridors, a lot of running down into dead ends, turning around, panicking. There was a lot of that in the last kind of 10-15 minutes, which in my opinion, didn't really add anything. And I just didn't really care. I was like, come on, get to who survives and who doesn't. And basically, is this film a masterpiece? No. But was it fun to watch? Yeah. I would recommend really late night, lights out, make it as loud as possible so that you can hear everything and just enjoy it. Enjoy it for what it is. It's not going to change your world. It's not going to change your life. But I do appreciate a low budget horror film that is decent, that stands up to kind of Hollywoodized big budget horror films, and this is one of them, and I'm going to give it 3 stars. So that's 3 stars for The Tunnel.
Hi folks, it's Mark from the podcast Food with Mark Bittman. As the weather gets warmer, it's time for lighter meals, and Whole Foods Market has just what you're looking for with great everyday prices. Look for the yellow, low price signs that help you save money without compromising the quality you expect. Nothing, absolutely nothing in the store has any high fructose corn syrup, for example. Just shop with confidence. Save on the best of spring with great everyday prices at Whole Foods Market.
Will full coverage make me look cakey? Is my undertone neutral or is it cool? We get it. Finding the right foundation is hard. But with Il Makiage, it's easy to find your perfect match online, customized for your unique skin tone and coverage needs. Plus, with Try Before You Buy, you can try your full size at home for 14 days. With over 600,000 five-star reviews, this best-selling foundation is going viral for a reason. Take the Power Match quiz now at ilmakiage.com/quiz. ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
Hey, Prime members, are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts, included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free, or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Worried about what ingredients are hiding in your groceries? Let us take the guesswork out. We're Thrive Market, the online grocery store with the highest quality standards in the industry. We restrict 1,000 plus ingredients, so you can trust that you'll only find the best high-quality, organic, and sustainable brands, all free of the junk. With savings up to 30% off and fast carbon-neutral shipping, you get top trusted groceries at your door, and you can stop worrying about what your kids get their hands on. Start shopping at thrivemarket.com/podcast for 30% off your first order and a free gift.
Which brings us to our story this week. Now, our story this week, surprise! Our wonderful, darling Tim Cloke is back to tell us some stories about a haunted ship. No, not a haunted ship, a cursed ship, and some maritime folklore and superstition, which I love. I hope you guys enjoy it. The links to everywhere that you can find Tim will be in the description of this episode. So let's get into it. And I am joined in the virtual studio by the wonderful, the stunning, the glorious, the effervescent, the I was going to say the sexy Tim Cloke. Tim, welcome to the virtual studio. How are we doing today?
I'm very amused by the fact that we've apparently done enough of these now that you've run out of adjectives to describe me.
Or else all I could think of was sexy. I was just like, look at that fine man.
Well, I'm glad that apparently my webcam is showing me my best light today. I'm really well, Emma. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to doing another episode. Hopefully less chaotic than some that we've done.
For those who don't know who you are, who might be checking in randomly on this episode, who are you? Why are you here?
Well, first and foremost, I'm your mate, so that's part of it. But I'm also a history teacher, and I've got my own YouTube channel, Mr. Cloke History, which you're very welcome to go and check out and subscribe. And basically, I love telling historical stories with a spooky flavour, and so that's what we're going to be doing again today.
With a supernatural twist.
Indeed.
That's what we want to hear. Can you give a hint as to what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, yeah, I can do, because I prepared a few episodes already, and then I wrote another one very recently, and you immediately I want that one. So we're going to be looking at, well, I'm just going to say a cursed ship today.
We love a cursed ship story.
So we're going to be looking at a cursed ship story today, but I thought I'd link it in more widely with a bit of maritime folklore and superstition as well.
Yes, I love a bit of maritime folklore and superstition. I think it's fascinating because I do feel like ships became this sort of micro environment all on their own.
Totally.
You know what I mean? This little social environment all on their own, and these wonderful folkloric superstitions grew up in those environments, and I think it's pretty cool.
I do as well. And I think that there was so much mystery as well to the disappearances of ships in the age of sail, especially, that it's inevitable that people would develop superstitions to try and exert a certain amount of control over forces over which, let's be honest, they had virtually no control at all. And let's face facts, we are both of us from island nations, aren't we? So yes. if our peoples, if you like, wanted to stretch out into the world in the past, then they had to go by sea. Those were the highways and the airways, if you like, of the day. And so there are an absolute wealth of stories about this, but we're going to be looking at a particular case of a ship that got a very unlucky reputation. And I'll just say again, the cat is tearing at the carpet again for attention, I think. So if anyone can hear that, you have my apologies.
I've got a little mischievous cat who's sitting looking at me, and he's thinking, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to fuck up that microphone. That's what's going to happen. I can see it in his eyes.
I've got a little someone who's meowing as well at the moment, probably because she feels that because it is within an hour of her usual tea time, that She deserves to be fed early. It's not going to happen. We will persevere. Shall I get into the story?
Let's get into it.
All right, let's go. The 3rd of November, 1857. The shipyards of Messrs. Scott Russell and Company, Millwall, London, England. Gazing on and chewing the end of an already extinguished and soggy cigar was one of the 19th century's most revolutionary thinkers, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Brunel had first cut his teeth apprentice to his father, Mark, in building the Thames Tunnel not far away at Rotherhithe. He had since built marvels of stone, iron and concrete in the form of the great bridges at Clifton in Bristol and Saltash, spanning the River Tamar between Devon and Cornwall. But it wasn't just his eye for technical innovation and breathtaking ambition that marked him out. His mind brought forth concepts with which we are still familiar today. The genesis of today's international airports, integrated with railways, going into the major cities, began with Brunel's vision of being able to buy a ticket to New York from the terminus of his Great Western Railway at London, in Paddington, taking his steam trains along his broad gauge tracks over his viaducts and through his tunnels to his station at Bristol Temple Meads, and then onwards to his great steamships for the transatlantic voyage. Brunel's locomotives seemed to shrink time and space such that a standardised time zone across Britain had to be adapted, lest Brunel's timetables become impossibly complex. If any one man built the modern world, it was Isambard Kingdom Brunel. But this ruthlessly brilliant man was also a maverick. Investors knew that Brunel's capacity for consuming capital rivaled his capacity for vaulting ambition. Not all of his schemes paid off. His broad-gauge railways were objectively superior to Stephenson's 4-foot 8.5-inch standard gauge, but it was also more expensive. Eventually it was torn up and relayed at great expense. His atmospheric railway in Devon was thwarted by rats nibbling at the vital leather air seals along the vacuum pipe, nature fighting back against modernity. The scheme needed new conventional locomotives to finish the job. A more triumphant but still dangerous break with tradition was Brunel's near obsession with iron. Britain connected its empire through the voyages of magnificent wooden sailing ships. Brunel devised ships of ever greater size, which demanded the use of more brutal and unyielding material. While critics assured him that his scheme to power a steamship across the Atlantic using new screw propellers was sheer folly, Brunel scoffed and built the world's first and largest all-iron steam-powered propeller-driven ship, the Great Britain. It worked, and now, in 1857, on the stinking banks of the River Thames, he gazed upon the project with which he would cement his legacy. In his own words, Brunel had declared that he had never embarked on any one thing to which I have so entirely devoted myself, and to which I have devoted so much time, so much thought and labour, on the success of which I have staked so much reputation. No wonder Brunel referred to his latest project as his great babe. To history, this ship, this floating city, would be known as the Great Eastern. Little did he know that already some held a troubling conviction that the ship was cursed. Have you heard of the Great Eastern before, Emma?
I have never heard of the Great Eastern. I've heard of Brunel, obviously, but I've never heard of the Great Eastern. Never heard of it.
Well, you can still visit the Great Britain, his first iron steam-powered, screw-powered ship. And by screw, I mean a propeller on the back. They call them screws as well. That was Hades jumping on...
Hades! Stop it, you dweeb!
That was very dramatic.
Stop, honestly. It's just constant.
Both of us are being completely bullied by our pets today, aren't we?
Oh, I know. Our baby. Sorry, go on.
So Brunel's Great Britain is still preserved, and it's in dry dock at Bristol. You can go and visit. It's been beautifully restored inside and out, and you really get a sense for the technology and how far ahead it was of its time. But the Great Eastern, which is not preserved, was of an absolute magnitude greater. So we're going to get into what the Great Eastern was and where its misfortunes began. And it will be up to you as you hear these various stories about it as to whether this ship was just unlucky or whether it truly was cursed. Are you ready to get into it?
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it was cursed.
Well, I reckon so as well, but let's see what you think.
Let's go.
But where might one discover the genesis of this so-called curse? Seafarers are, understandably, a superstitious bunch. For as long as mankind has ventured onto the waves, the adventurous impulse has been met by the knowledge that one might simply disappear, victim to the fate that only the crashing waves and the crying gulls know. Brunel's Great Eastern had been conceived as a vast floating palace. Brunel had dreamed of adding to his portfolio of transatlantic liners a ship of ever greater prestige, capable of sailing to Australia without refueling or making port on the way. This involved the necessity of building a ship that could carry sufficient coal for the journey, which itself would require greater engine power, which in turn would demand more coal and therefore greater capacity. Brunel had been meticulous. He calculated that a vast iron ship of over 18,000 tons could do the job. Built from riveted iron plates, this monster of the seas would be nearly 700 feet in length and 82 feet across its decks. Long and slender for speed and efficiency, the Great Eastern would be larger than any ship ever built by a factor of 6. Its scale would not be surpassed for half a century. She would stride over the waves by the power of 4 enormous engines developing 8,000 horsepower to turn a massive screw propeller and the 2 largest side paddles ever built. The innovations did not stop there. The great ship would have a riveted double hull, inspired by the box structures of Brunel's bridges for rigidity, but also providing the extra reassurance of an additional hull should one be gashed open by rocks. One imagines that this was scarce comfort to the young boys inside during construction as they held rivets in place as hammer blows reverberated, deafening them. While the double hull was insurance against flooding, the needed investment into the ship began as a trickle. It took all of Brunel's legendary talents as a salesman to convince enough men to part with the cash to finance his dream. Finally, persuaded by the promise that the Great Eastern would carry 4,000 passengers and over 400 crew, investors finally stumped up the cash once the Russell Shipyard made a competitive bid to build the ship, and the Eastern Steam Navigation Company was born. Unknown to Brunel, Russell's Shipyard was in financial trouble, and they had backed the project as a last-chance gamble to revive their fortunes. Yet all these troubles speak of the high-stakes investment of the age and other earthly problems. Could the ship really be cursed by the mere trifles of men? These things may well have occupied Brunel's mind as he eyed each massive and every minute preparation for the great ship's launch. The company directors had recently suggested the almost complete ship to be renamed the Leviathan, to which Brunel had allegedly slapped, "You can name her Tom Thumb for all I care." Brunel was little bothered by sailors' superstitions about the renaming of ships. He had broken enough conventions with his design that it is scarcely compared to any other object afloat. Great Eastern was too long to be launched stern first into the Thames, and so instead she sat parallel to the river on great rails, ready to slide sideways into the water. No such launch had ever been attempted before, and moving 18,915 tons of ship would make it the heaviest object ever moved by human beings. The risks were staggering, and yet the Great Eastern Steam Navigation Company, desperate to start making a return on their investment, had sold tickets to the launch, much against Brunel's protests. The moment had arrived. The blocks were pulled free, and the windlasses began to turn. Great Eastern nudged sideways with a scrape and a lurch, and then before any remedy might be sought, a chain caught and snapped. The gigantic iron links whipped aside, and the windlass spun madly out of control, murderously ploughing into the workers, killing 2 outright. The Great Eastern had not yet entered the water, yet she had claimed 2 victims, and then stuck fast. It would take the combined efforts of windlasses, hydraulic rams, and nearly 2 months of expensive delays to finally inch the great ship into the Thames. Though 6 workers had died in her construction, this was considered a fair return by the standards of engineering projects of the day. It was the disastrous and deadly launch that had set tongues wagging among the labourers that the ship was not only Brunel's folly, but a cursed ship. 8 months of fitting out followed before Great Eastern was ready to finally stretch her legs and take to sea. Within this time, she had managed to ruin her investors to the tune of £3 million, and the Eastern Steam Navigation Company was no more. Nevertheless, when a new company took over, they were encouraged at the sheer scale of their purchase. She was a majestic sight, with 5 smart funnels, side panels of mesmerizing size, and elegant auxiliary masts and sails along her length. In September 1859, she sailed along the south coast as well-wishers waved from the cliffs, dumbfounded by her size and power. Brunel posed for photographs and invited worthies, slapped his back, and then the peace of the moment was suddenly torn apart. A gigantic explosion. A boiler had erupted into a scalding mass of steam, fire, and shattered iron, killing 5 of her crew and leaving others dazed and stumbling on the decks as scald whitened flesh hung from bleached bone. The culprit was a simple stuck valve, worth a few shillings, left closed after an ironic safety test. Great Eastern limped to the port of Holyhead, Caergybi in Wales, for essential repairs, but Brunel was a ruined man. Just a few days later, on September the 5th, 1859, he suffered a massive stroke and died. He never saw his great babe take to the seas for her maiden voyage. One newspaper's obituary seems harsh in its condemnation of Brunel's fiscal incompetence compared to his legacy as a great engineer, printing, "Brunel was the right man for the nation, but unfortunately he was not the right man for the shareholders. They must stoop who gather gold, and Brunel could never stoop." The newspaper later continued, "The history of invention records no instance of grand novelties so boldly imagined and so successfully carried out by the same individual." Now, if we pause there, Emma, the ship has not yet even got into paying service, and it has taken people with it.
Listen, fellas dying left, right, and centre over this ship. And here's the thing, right? Give over men trying to build the biggest thing possible. That's all it's about. Building big things. It's pure phallic behavior. It's pure willy waving. How big can I make this thing? Is this thing, in fact, too big that we might not be able to even fucking launch it in the first place without people dying? That doesn't matter, because you know why? I need to prove to everybody how big my penis is by building a big ship.
Well, how do you really feel, Emma? Let us know. The thing is, Brunel is well known for having these concepts which he can conjure up on paper, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And we tend to remember his triumphs and sideline his failures. And this so far has been one of his failures. And even he's dead. I mean, the stress of it has killed him. There's very little doubt about that. He was not an old man when he died. He's in his mid-50s. And that is not an old man, even by the standards of Victorian age, for a man of his status.
Yeah.
Now, there is a certain commercial logic to be able to say, well, we need to build a ship that's big enough to carry enough coal to make Australia without having to refuel, because it's not always easy to pick up more coal at the ports along the way. They're all set up for sail ships after all. But yeah, a lot of this is about him saying, well, I want it to be the biggest and the best and the most amazing thing that the world has ever seen. And in a way, it was.
Yeah, and I will not take that away from him. Biggest and best killer ship in the world.
And it's not finished yet. Because let's not forget, it's not just killed these men, it's also ruined all these investors who've pumped their money into it. And they've very much been taken for a financial ride here, and they've been ruined. They've been sunk as well, if we're going to use this sort of nautical expression.
Yeah.
But the ship isn't done yet. Shall we continue?
Oh my God, yeah. What I feel like this ship is like Jaws. You know that?
Yeah.
You know, is it Jaws 3 where the shark is like purposefully actively hunting members of the same family? That's what I immediately think about this ship.
It's gobbling up money, and it seems to be gobbling up men as well. But maybe brighter times are ahead. But if I'm continuing, I think you probably know that actually. Not so much.
I'm going to say no brighter times ahead.
Sure enough, later that month, Great Eastern did set forth on her maiden voyage, but not to Australia as Brunel had conceived, but for New York. Perhaps the curse afflicting the ship had died with Brunel. On her first sailing, she had shrugged off a gale with almost indecent ease. Later, she surged through the notorious Royal Charter storm, which had wrecked a great ship of that name off Anglesey, and many others beside. Great Eastern scarcely shuddered in the face of hurricane waves. Duly, the great ship docked in Manhattan, wrecking a wooden jetty in the process, only to be thoroughly snubbed by the people of the Big Apple, who were appalled at the $1 asking price to have a look around the ship. She returned to Liverpool with barely a paying soul on board, after an unprofitable first sailing. She variously served, uneventfully and again unprofitably, as a liner and a troop ship, until her fortunes were restricted yet further by the closure of ports in the American Civil War. Despite this lack of financial reward, Brunel's engineering genius seemed to be holding, In 1861, she endured 3 days in a hurricane, her paddle wheels torn off and rudder bent into the propeller, and yet still she made port without a life lost. Here, though, her luck faltered. Could the curse have returned? On the 17th of August, 1862, Great Eastern was in the final stages of another transatlantic voyage to New York. Laden with 820 passengers, she was well below her design capacity, but she had found a trade in carrying cargo, several thousand tons on this occasion. She was deep in the water, drafting nearly 30 feet, but making good speed. Her captain increased her power to over 10 knots to outrun a squall of rain and choppy water behind, and cautiously took the great vessel wide of the submerged banks of Sandy Hook. As she steamed by Montague Point, some crew deep in the boiler rooms felt a distinct shudder and supposed that she must have clipped a sandbank, but Great Eastern surged on without apparent concern. As she docked, though, it was clear that she had taken on water and had a distinct list to one side. A diver inspected the hull and found to his horror that a rock had gashed a 9-foot hole in the outer hull, scraped the inner hull of this part of the ship, and the tip of that rock was now embedded in the hull. Great Eastern had struck an uncharted rock 20 feet below the water's surface. No other ship ever sailed could have touched it, and so it became known as the Great Eastern Rock, and it's still there. But if this seems more a deliverance than a curse, this was not a view shared by the embattled shareholders. No dry dock in the world could accommodate so grand a ship. Consequently, expensive repairs behind a cofferdam were carried out at an eye-watering cost of £350,000. Enough was enough. By 1864, the investors cut their losses and sold her off. The last hurrah was her role in laying the first transatlantic telegraph cable in 1865, the only ship in the world huge enough to even attempt such a feat. She performed this task admirably, bringing instant communication between two continents separated by an ocean for the first time. By 1885, Brunel's great ship had sunk every investor who had put faith and cash into her. She had sunk 2 mighty navigation companies too. Added to that, the stress of her difficult birth had done for her visionary designer at the early age of 53, and she had stolen the lives of several builders and crewmen during her construction and service. Given up, she lay off Merseyside in ignominy, used as a vast floating billboard for whatever brand would pay for the privilege, streaked with rust and weighed down by barnacles and weed. In 1885, she was only worth her weight in scrap iron. Rumours spread that she would be spectacularly blown up with gunpowder, but sense prevailed, and she was beached, her proud outline smashed by wrecking balls, her carcass decayed, stringers standing tall like the ribs of some gargantuan beached whale. But it was when workmen began to take apart her internal structures that other rumours spread, that the cursed ship harboured a restless spirit. Men reported seeing the apparition of a sweat-grimed riveter lurking in the now dark chambers of the dying ship. They heard the tap of his hammer on rivets, only to turn and find nobody there. They heard the moans and cries of a man who died so that the ship might be built, rather than work so that his family, living in East End squalor, might eat that evening. Then, as the double hull was dismantled past the waterline, a grisly discovery was made. The entombed skeleton of a riveter, still in his clothes and with his tools, lying trapped between the plates of the great ship. Perhaps he was killed by a falling rivet, or simply tumbled to his doom within the belly of the Leviathan. Surely that must be preferable to being sealed up in the hull alive, the din of hammers and industry hurrying to a deadline, drowning out his cries for help. Whatever the deaths at the ill-fated launch, the decision to rename her, or Brunel's folly to construct such a beast in defiance of reason, perhaps this unfortunate worker is the real origin of the curse of the Great Eastern.
I will say, I wrote down that she arrives in New York, immediately wrecks a jetty.
Yes.
Just smashes
I couldn't see it.
into a wooden jetty. I'm here. Everybody,
Hello.
I'm
Smash.
massive. I'm massive. I'm just here smashing shit up immediately.
Yeah. The people of New York go, oh, we'd love to have a look round. It's $1 each. Nah.
No,
actually, the other ships are causing 20. They're all charging 25 cents, which was like the going rate. Nah.
And also, it's just a big ship. You know what I mean?
Big
it's
ship.
It's a ship, but bigger. Like that's all it is. I find it really fascinating that this sort of failed venture in mega capitalism ends in the ship being a giant billboard for whoever will pay for it.
It's
it's a cruel irony, isn't it?
It truly is an enormous folly, isn't it? It's overreaching. It so represents greed and overconfidence as well. And of course, greater ships have been built ever since. So the Titanic was, getting on for twice the size, I think, if I'm being realistic. And modern cruise ships are 8 times the size. But
oh my God, modern cruise ships versus the Titanic blows my mind.
They're terrifyingly huge, aren't they?
They're. I saw a modern cruise ship, right, for the first time in real life when I was in Malta last year, right? Yeah. And it pulled out of the dock, and I was like, that thing is the size of this island. What the fuck? It was enormous.
It is huge. By the way, I think we have discussed this before, and it is mind-blowing, isn't it? The scale of these things is huge. And it would have been the same for people back then. But you've got this sort of tension between all the investors. So we've put some money in it, and we want to kind of start seeing some of this come back. And so just as things do today, they start cutting corners on safety. They start cutting corners on checks, and they shave a little bit of expenditure off here. And Brunel's always saying, oh, no, we mustn't do this, because he's very much the pure engineer. He's not bothered by how much money it costs. He's bothered about his legacy and what he achieves.
Yeah, and it's working.
And it is working absolutely right. And then there's this story underlying it all of the trapped riveter between the plates.
That honestly gave me the heebie-jeebies, because you just sort of hope that man, that a rivet did fall on his head and he died immediately.
So he was dead before he even got down there.
Dead before he even knew where he was. That's all you can hope. Because if you imagine, it doesn't even, it's like being buried alive. It doesn't even bear thinking about.
Yeah. And how long would he have been in there, wondering or crying for help, and him not being heard? It's
absolutely horrific.
And what was told to his family as well?
Yeah, where was he? Do you know what I mean? He's gone. We left him in New York. Like, where was he?
I mean, well, it would have been well before then. It would have been at the shipyard before it was even born.
God, it would have been. Yes, he just didn't come home.
So he'd have been walking distance from his house.
Oh, that's awful.
You know how historians sometimes ruin things, though?
Oh, go on. Yeah, it didn't happen.
There's no evidence that it happened.
There's so many of these stories that I read where you're like, I read one last week on the podcast, and it was about like this murdering minister who had murdered his entire flock, and now they're all haunting this church.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that ever happened. And that'd be something that people would write about, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, in fairness, with this one, it's not impossible that it did happen. Yeah. The stories are not well linked to the contemporary sources, and even a sort of slapdash Victorian engineering company probably would have had records of who was turning up to work that day in order for them to get paid, and there isn't any evidence of an additional unaccounted man. That said, there were problems with the sources at the time, and it is entirely possible that it could happen. It's just really quite unlikely. So it's one of those things that actually will rely on a little bit of faith. The evidence isn't good for it, but neither does the available evidence completely exclude that it could have happened as well. So your guess is as good as mine, really. I would probably edge towards it probably wasn't true, and that people are trying to kind of find a reason for why this ship was apparently so unlucky. But equally, it could have been true in this case. We cannot completely rule it out like we do sometimes, but
I'm going to say that it's true.
Direction. Let's just agree to that, shall we?
Yeah. I'm saying that it's true. I'm saying they didn't record it properly because they didn't want people to know that this man had gone missing on the clock and nobody had done anything about it. So they decided, we'll just say nothing. And then when they found the body, they were like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
So they just didn't record it properly. I'm going down that road.
I like that fact as well. And the fact that the ship wasn't actually around for that long as well. It's around for 30 years or so, and that's it. And then it's gone. And if you ever want to see a part of the Great Eastern, you can go down to the foreshore where it was scrapped and there's still a few rivets lying around and things, and people have filmed down there. But that was all valuable iron. It was just going to get made into other stuff, and more or less, that's exactly what happened to it. And I do urge you to look up pictures of it, because whatever you think about the stupidity of building the thing, my word, it's impressive looking, because it doesn't look like a sort of liner of the sort of Titanic or Mauritania style. It doesn't have that superstructure on top. It's just this almost flat-decked ship with these 5 or later 4 funnels sticking out of it, and big sails as well to make it more efficient. These gigantic, very steampunk paddles on the side of it. But you do look at it and think, yeah, that's someone has scaled up a ship of the time in such an absurd way that it was never probably going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy looking.
You just looked it up.
Yeah.
But it's very dangerous being at sea in general. And so I thought we could conclude by looking at some of my favourite maritime superstitions.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. There is nothing I love more than superstitions in general.
Yeah.
But maritime superstitions are great.
They are so good. And you know what? There are so many of them. You could probably fill about 6 episodes with it.
Yes,
so I've been quite selective here, and I've chosen just some of my favourites. So shall we get into it?
Yes, please.
Sailing, being one of mankind's more perilous endeavours, has given rise to an enormous amount of folklore and superstition. Curses like that attached to the Great Eastern are sometimes attributed to such superstitions, but there are about as many which relate to good fortune too. However, so as to finish on a high, we will first consider those actions which it was believed invited disaster upon the seafarer. A well-known saying goes, "Red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky at morning, sailors take warning." It speaks of the mood of sailors about to set out on a potentially dangerous voyage and what the weather might have in store for those in peril on the sea. However, unlike the rest of the superstitions we will consider today, this one might be backed by meteorological science. Presuming that this superstition originated at middling latitudes in what we might call the Western world, a red sky at night would indicate the sun's rays passing through clear skies to the west, with which the prevailing winds from the Atlantic would suggest the approach of clear skies and light winds the next morning. However, the reverse is true in the morning, with the building clouds of approaching storm fronts reflecting back the rays of the rising sun. And so this actually was a good idea, and it took a little bit of time to heed it. Overhead conditions might not be the only omen to make a sailor think twice about setting sail. A long-lasting tradition made it unlucky to set sail on Candlemas after the 12 days of Christmas, related to the day that festivities end and decorations are traditionally taken down. The same holds true for any Friday, not just Friday the 13th. The latter superstition had in times past posed military and operational obstacles for the Royal Navy in a time of increasing professionalism. To counteract this, the Admiralty commissioned the warship HMS Friday. The ship, fitted out, set sail on Friday the 13th to prove the doubting sailors wrong. Of course, a storm blew in, and she was never seen or heard from again. No ship of the Royal Navy has ever been named HMS Friday, but why should we let that spoil a good story? Passengers are considered to be good or ill omens too. A sailor or passenger considered bad luck might be called a Jonah, after the biblical namesake, with an unfortunate acquaintanceship with a whale. By extension, members of the clergy have been considered unlucky passengers, as they are considered the successors to the original Jonah. Of course, women have been considered bad luck passengers too. How far this can be ascribed to misogyny is hard to tell, or was it a yarn spun to dissuade sailors from bringing aboard guests while in ports far from home? People with red hair have also been considered unlucky at sea, though with apparently little explanation. So how the crew felt then in 1581 when Elizabeth I stepped aboard the Golden Hind to make Sir Francis Drake a knight in defiance of both of these superstitions, we can only guess. Christening a ship by breaking a bottle of champagne or other drink over the bow has long been a maritime ritual, but bad fortune awaits any where the bottle awkwardly pings off the planks or plates unbroken. Whistling on board a ship is considered a sure way to increase the wind speed, and therefore strongly discouraged. How much misfortune whistling actually brought might be more related to the violent corrections of shipmates in response to a potentially annoying behaviour than any actual effect on the elements. Killing seabirds, particularly albatross, is also considered a sure way to bring disaster upon a ship. This superstition is referred to in Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Here, the albatross leads a ship through the ice, and while the crew rewarded it with food and praise, the eponymous mariner killed it. Bringing about misfortune to the ship and its crew, the mariner ostracised, literally, with an albatross around his neck in penance. A more ambiguous example of seafaring folklore concerns a Germanic tradition. But I'll pause before we move on to that. So what do you think of these bad luck superstitions at sea?
I love them.
They are so good, aren't they? And I love the fact that the Red Sky at Night Sailor's Delight one actually has some truth to it.
And it's like I grew up hearing that, but not with sailors. We'd say Red Sky Night, Shepherd's Delight.
Yes,
Red
I've heard
Sky
that one as
Morning,
well.
Shepherd's Warning. So we would never say sailors, but like it's also true. Like when there's a Red Sky at Night, it's going to be a nice day the next day. That is. I'm sorry, it's a fact. It's a scientific fact. Okay, we grew up with that, and it's real.
The thing is, we live in. Well, when we say the West, I mean quite literally for me, I live in the West Country. You grew up in Ireland to the west as well. So the prevailing weather from the Atlantic did come from that direction. So it really did hold true for us. And it's nice to know that this little bit of superstition is something that really had some backing to it. I do wonder, though, if people at other parts of the world have ever heard that expression. Maybe it's just the one that exists
maybe
here.
It just does, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to get in contact and let us know whether they hear that in other parts of the world as well, that would be interesting, and whether it's got some truth there. But all of this stuff about annoying behaviours I really like. It's a sense of going, oh, no, it's bad luck to do that. Is it, or are you just going to hit me with a shovel if I carry on?
Yeah. Is it bad luck, or are you guys going to beat me up? Like, which one is it?
But they've got to come up with ways of coping with the fact that they are likely to be on board what is a very small enclosed space for months at a time and get on, basically.
And just get on with it and try and live in each other's space. That's what I mean about it being its own little weird, like, micro world on a ship. I don't know if you cover this in the next bit. You probably don't. But do you know anything about the world of nautical tattoos?
No, I haven't done much on that. I know that they are a tradition when people go to port. I've known sailors who had tattoos as well.
Yeah.
But weigh in. If I might use a nautical expression. I'm
really fascinated by nautical tattoos. I'm also really fascinated by Russian prison tattoos, but that's a whole other thing, right? Because I think the use of tattoos in order to depict your status as a sailor and to immediately flag to other sailors, look, this is what I have done. This is where I've been in the world. I think it's fascinating. Like, swallow tattoos are really common for sailors, and they indicate that you've traveled. I think it's 5,000 nautical miles. And then you've got like hula girls. If you get a hula girl tattooed on you, it indicates that you've been to Hawaii. And there's like, if you get a ship tattooed on you, it's Cape Horn, I think, that you've traveled around it. There's loads of different ones. But one of my favorite ones is that sailors often had a pig and a rooster tattooed on their feet. Do you know why?
No, go on.
This is really fascinating. So a pig and a rooster on each foot is designed to, it's like a superstition that it will help you to stop drowning, because ships often had animals on them, like farm animals, pigs, roosters, whatever. And if a ship went down, those animals were in wooden crates, and those crates would float. So they would be often seen as the only survivors. So if you had a pig and a rooster tattooed on you, then you're more likely to survive drowning, which I think is fascinating.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. I'd never heard that, and it hadn't come up in my research. I absolutely love it. There is some stuff about animals here, which I will be touching upon. More the kind of good luck stuff, really. But yeah, that is a brilliant one. I'm definitely.
I know, isn't it good? It's a good one, and it's one that you don't, because we see lots of different sailor tattoos, but specifically like the nautical star, the swallows, the ships. Like sailors used to get hold fast tattooed on their knuckles, which might be probably the dawn of knuckle tattoos and why they were so why they've become so popular. But it was about holding fast, was literally about holding rope tightly and not letting go and all that stuff.
And it kind of reminds you as well about how much attitudes over tattoos have changed over time, because you imagine that people were a bit nervous of sailors turning up in a random port. They're not invested in that community. They've been at sea for all this time. They're going to get drunk or smash things up or cause trouble. And it would give them that sense of that other status, wouldn't it? And of course, so much of that's changed. Tattoos are so mainstream now, but back then it would have been really daring, wouldn't it? So that's a fantastic addition. What I've got next, though, is we've got a bit of a very small section of Germanic folklore, and then we're going to get into some of the more good luck stuff and the sort of things that people did to try and protect themselves on voyages. A more ambiguous example of seafaring folklore concerns the Germanic tradition of the Klabautermann. This spirit might be similar to a friendly house spirit who generally helps sailors perform their duties and keep the ship safe. One translation of the name means caulker, after the job of hammering oakum from ropes between the planks for waterproofing. He is said to rescue sailors who fall overboard, help with the singing of songs, and he shows expertise in maintaining a ship. Such positive associations result in the inclusion of a small depiction of the klabauterman being carved on the masts, resplendent in yellow raincoat, tobacco pipe, and wielding a caulking hammer. However, he can be an ill omen too. It is said that he is invisible to all crews, except those on ships which are doomed. Any ship would be blessed then to carry a klabauterman, but woe betide those who see him or seek him. We continue this very much not exhaustive list with more positive superstitions. Sailors will carve crosses and anchors into the ship, known as a St. Clement's cross, to ward off evil and provide protection. St. Elmo's fire, the discharge of blue flames of electricity from ships' masts, was also seen to be protection from the Almighty at work, though in truth we now know that it's actually a sign of electricity-laden air and the risk of storms. Similar spiritual protection is believed to have been afforded by the keeping of a hot cross bun in the kitchens or galley. Such sweet buns adorned with a white cross of pastry would be left above the ovens to dry out and go stale, not being replaced until the following year. Another curious rite of passage, believed to provide the mariner with spiritual protection, this time from the ancient god of the oceans himself, King Neptune, is this. In later years, the ritual has gained a somewhat notorious reputation as a degrading hazing ritual. But instances of crossing the line ceremonies can be traced back to the 18th century Royal Navy. The ceremony marks a sailor's first time crossing the line, meaning the equator, and provided a rare opportunity for crews to let off steam and behave with a more relaxed discipline. It was still observed even in the depths of the World Wars and applied to all aboard the ship, from the captain to the ship's cat. Early versions involved being dunked in the ocean 3 times, most coming up smiling and ecstatic at the achievement of sailing so far from home, if a little drowned too. Other versions concerned experienced sailors dressing up as Neptune, using whatever costume and props could be concocted from items found aboard the ship, who could then variously order the participants about, shower them with water and soap, or engage them in mock interrogation. Even Charles Darwin, on the famous voyage of HMS Beagle, wasn't immune from such a ceremony. One of the 4 griffins or novices aboard, he found himself confronted by 3 Neptunes armed with buckets of water. He wrote, "I was then placed on a plank, which could be easily tilted up into a large bath of water. They then lathered up my face and mouth with pitch and paint, and then scraped some of it off with a piece of roughened iron hoop. A signal being given, I was tilted head over heels into the water. At last, glad enough, I escaped. Most of the others were treated much worse. No one, not even the captain, got clear of being wet through." So have you heard of the crossing the line ceremony before? Because that reminds me of tattoo stories.
I've never heard of that before.
I first encountered this in a nautical themed pub in Kent, actually, and I saw a load of certificates on the walls that said crossing the line, lots of pictures of King Neptune, and I looked it up, and yeah, it is something that still goes on today, even aboard ships. Yeah, it still goes on today aboard Royal Navy ships. Crossing the line, they'll look at it and go, right, we're sailing south of the equator, and they will know from their records who has never crossed the line before. There are some unfortunate instances where basically this has gone too far, and there was a scandal in the Australian Navy about 20 years ago where it definitely went too far and people were treated really abominably. But now it's still seen as this kind of bit of slapdash fun and superstition, and it becomes a bit of a party. And again, it's served this social function as well, of where the discipline aboard Royal Navy ships especially has to be so strict in order to make them efficient warships. Just having that one afternoon of complete and utter lunacy and
just silliness, just like we're going to dress up and throw water and soap over people and pretend to be Neptune and run around and have a good time. Like there is an element of silliness to it. Obviously, of course, people inevitably there's going to be people that take it too far. Do you know what I mean? Which just makes me it's just ridiculous. It's just absurd. But I think at its very core, fundamentally, I think it's a really, really lovely thing to do. Like, and it just allows people to be human because you can't live that disciplined life all the time without blowing off some steam.
Yeah, and I like the idea as well that even the ship's captain will be looking down at all this going on with a knowing smile, saying, "Yep, happened to me.
I was there too."
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that sort of shared experience, isn't it? And it's been going on for all this time. And I've known people who've served in the Navy and they've had it happen to them. And Marines on board ships, it happens to them as well, because anyone on the ship who's never crossed the line before will find it. And some of the rare survivors of this now, even in the merchant marine, because it happens aboard merchant ships as well, they will organize a version of this even on cruise ships, where of course the majority of the passengers won't have crossed the line before. But the really authentic one is where it's a very self-contained ship's company, probably with no cameras around, and there's that opportunity to say, look, we all know that in a few hours time discipline is going to be right back on the table again, and you're not allowed to take any liberties again. But just for now, we're going to get this person who's maybe in charge of a section of the ship, and we're going to dunk them in water, we're going to cover them in foam, and we're going to make them look ridiculous whilst we're dressed up as Neptune. Maybe there's just something quite British about that brand of silliness as well, which is very appealing.
I also love the idea of them bloody putting together their makeshift Neptune costumes from whatever they can find on board the ship. There's something very musical theatre camp about that.
Absolutely. And getting broom handles and sticking trident heads on them, and crowns made out of paper, and old sails for robes. It's very appealing. And I'm sure you can find pictures of it. I've seen pictures of it even in the depths of the world wars, which can hardly get more serious than that. They're still finding time to do this because it is such a tradition. It's seen as such a necessity for the morale as well. I've got on to my last section now, but I think I've left what is going to be your favorite bit for last. What is it that we like talking about pretty much more than anything else?
Cats.
Let's get into it.
Was that a good guess? Oh my God.
It was a good guess. We will conclude this brief voyage through maritime folklore to consider perhaps the most important member of any ship's crew. For millennia, these members of the crew were instrumental in preventing disease, preserving food stocks, maintaining ropes, spare sails, and latterly, electrical wiring, and providing a morale boost for an often homesick crew. I refer, of course, to the ship's cat, chief mouser and anti-vermin officer aboard any ocean-going vessel. DNA and archaeological evidence shows that domesticated cats have been a part of human seafaring since ancient Egyptian times, and their genetics show a clear spread through Europe and later the world along shipping lanes which can be traced. Cats at sea are the subject of many superstitions. On land, black cats are often seen as bad luck or an ill omen, a prejudice that sees black cats passed over from rescue charities to this day, except of course our Hades. However, at sea, a black cat is a prized mascot of good luck. Should the ship's cat approach a crew member, it is seen as a sign of good luck, rewarded with a smooth down of the fur or a rub of the cheek. Should the cat approach and then retreat, or worse, run away, it was seen as bad luck, and that sailor may risk being seen as a Jonah. The importance of keeping the ship's cat happy meant great care was lavished on them, with many rewarded honorary ranks and their own sleeping quarters, be it in a miniature hammock or in some cases the captain's hat. Further to this, polydactyl cats were prized for their rarity and supposed better balance on the narrow, precarious and often pitching and rolling vantage points aboard ships. They were also considered lucky. The loss of the ship's cat overboard was assumed to summon terrible storms, so crews took great care to protect their feline colleagues. Should a cat refuse to embark upon a ship, this was also seen as a serious omen. Take the example of Emmy, the ship's cat of the liner RMS Empress of Ireland. Emmy, an orange tabby of typically headstrong personality, had given birth to a litter of kittens while the ship was docked in Quebec City. Quite unexpectedly, Emmy abandoned her kittens and went ashore down a gangplank shortly after Empress of Ireland was due to weigh anchor and depart. She was duly fetched and returned to her kittens, only to abscond again. The captain could not justify delaying the sailing for the sake of Emmy, and so he left port on the 28th of May, 1914. In the early hours of the next morning, Empress of Ireland was struck amidships by the freighter Storstad while steaming in thick fog at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. She sank in minutes, taking 1,000 passengers and crew with her. If only Emmy's warning had been heeded with better attention. Cat owners will tell you that their cats behave differently for a wide variety of reasons, from boredom, begging for food, or even changes in routine. Crews aboard ship also learned to pay close attention to the behaviour of their furry friends as a possible means of predicting the weather. A cat grooming their fur against the direction of growth was thought to signal the imminent arrival of hailstorms. A cat sneezing was thought to herald rain, and a cat with what might be termed the zoomies, or exhibiting a mad half hour, might be a sign of wind. As a cat owner, some of these behaviours I recognise too, and there may be scientific support for these superstitions. Cats are indeed incredibly sensitive to changes in atmospheric pressure due to their advanced inner ear, which also helps them balance, jump, and fall with such aplomb. The ship's cat, therefore, may have been easier to interpret as a predictor of poor weather than even the most advanced barometers of the age. So in this examination of a cursed ship and various omens and superstitions of the sea, let us conclude with a much-deserved hurrah for the indispensable ship's cat.
The fact that cats that are black are seen as good luck on ships makes me so happy.
And me too. I had to get that in there.
Oh, that just makes me so happy. You know, when I adopted Hades, God of the Underworld, he's a black cat, and he's not only a black cat, he's a tomcat, and he is FIV positive. He is all the things that people don't want in a cat.
That's right. Yeah.
And when I was in the shelter, they were like, "We're so glad you're taking him because people don't want to take black cats." And it's that old superstition that people think black cats are bad luck.
And they're missing out on a brilliant cat as a result. Yeah, and how many other brilliant black cats are there out there?
I know, honestly. But I have to say, the day that I adopted Hades, 3 other black cats, I think it was, were also adopted on the same day.
That's good news.
That's good news. So maybe the tide is turning. Maybe people are less wary of the old superstitions about black cats. And you know what? If you're going to have a ship and you're going to have a cat on that ship and you're gonna think that cat having the zoomies is predicting hailstorms or whatever it is, or wind, fine, whatever keeps you going.
But I noticed the change in Lily's behaviour when there's bad weather around. You just do. They do go a bit kind of wild in advance of storms. Lily's a one as well that if there's really high winds coming, she'll just sort of go and hide somewhere, even though it's not bad weather yet.
She'll know it's coming.
Yeah, she knows it's coming. She kind of probably feels the drop in pressure. And I've found her, I've been looking around the house for her thinking, where on earth has she gone? And she's not actually hiding. She's just in her basket, because obviously as a cat owner, I've bought her a basket and she just never touches it. So it's the last place I'm going to look. But no, she'll be curled up in there, sort of looking a little bit sort of nervous. You think, oh yeah, what's up with you? Give her a bit of attention. And then within an hour or so, it's hail and wind and everything else outside. So you can really imagine that. But they were such indispensable members of the ship's company and pest control. And there are famous stories of ship's cats out there. I've not got any of this in my notes, but have you heard of any famous ship's cats?
Yeah, I do know there was a cat on a ship that survived like multiple ship sinkings.
Yeah, that's Unsinkable Sam. Do you know which ship he was on?
Sam. No, I don't, but I have read about Unsinkable Sam.
This is definitely one of those stories where I don't even want to know if it's not true, because it's just so brilliant.
I don't care if it's true or not.
Apparently, Unsinkable Sam's original name was Oscar, because, of course, he was a German cat.
Okay.
And he was the ship's cat aboard the Kriegsmarine Schlagschiffe Bismarck, the famous Bismarck of the Second World War.
Bismarck, okay.
So Bismarck was sunk with horrendous loss of life in a battle in 1941, May 1941. And it seems that Unsinkable Sam was taken aboard by HMS Cossack, which was one of the destroyers that fired torpedoes at Bismarck. And yeah, he was just clinging to a piece of driftwood. I mean, how he survived the horrendous destruction of the ship, because the ship was never actually sunk by Royal Navy guns. It had to be scuttled by its own crew. So it was just a complete flaming wreck from end to end, but still afloat somehow. So we can only really imagine that Oscar the cat must have jumped overboard. But he was adopted by the crew of Cossack and became known as Sam. And later he transferred aboard another ship that was associated with the destruction of Bismarck called Ark Royal, an aircraft carrier. And 1942, Ark Royal was struck by a torpedo from a German submarine, but it sank so slowly that there was very little loss of life. The only people who were killed were those who were killed in the initial impact. And so dear old Sam came off that ship as well and was absolutely fine. So there were the 3 ships that were sunk from underneath Unsinkable Sam. and he survived them all. So he's a really good example.
Cats are very resilient.
Yeah, they really are, aren't they? I mean, the idea that he was found clinging to a bit of driftwood, he must have looked like such a pathetic sight, but you can imagine him do it.
I want to die.
Have you heard of Mrs. Chippy?
No, I don't think I have.
Mrs. Chippy, of course, was actually a tomcat. He was called Mrs. Chippy because he was the best friend of the ship's carpenter aboard Shackleton's Endurance. So this is Mrs. Chippy, who everyone loved in the crew. Is a beautiful tabby cat. You can find photographs of him on the young stowaway Blackborough's shoulder if you want to look into it. It does end with a sad story. Unfortunately, Mrs. Chippy, there's no nice way of putting it. When the ship became stuck in the ice, and it was decided that they couldn't take anything with them, they were going to have to literally drag the lifeboats from Endurance across the ice because it was crushed by the ice, and it was actually found a couple of years ago, very well preserved in the water. They unfortunately got the pistol and they saw off the dogs and the cat because they couldn't take them with them. But to give you an idea of the strength of feeling behind that, it very nearly caused the most serious mutiny against Shackleton's leadership of the entire disaster. It's an amazing story of survival. In fact, every member of the ship's crew, or dare I say, every human member of the ship's crew, survived that sinking through the most ridiculous bravery and ingenuity and luck, and call it what you like. But probably the biggest challenge to Shackleton's legendary leadership came from Chippy McNish when the order was given, I'm sorry, Mrs. Chippy's going to have to go. And a lot of the crew really felt bad about it as well. And their relationship never really recovered from that.
Understandably.
And then there's dear old Simon of the Yangtze. HMS Amethyst was caught in the Yangtze River in China in 1949, and was basically there seeing if the Royal Navy still had the freedom to sail up and down the Yangtze River. Well, it turned out they didn't, and Chinese artillery just spent days shelling the ship as it went up and down the river. And dear old Simon, the ship's cat, he was wounded by shrapnel from the artillery, and just went to ground, and no one could find him. And eventually came out, and he went to the quarters where the wounded were being tended to. He had his own wounds tended, and then he just spent the remainder of the incident going from person to person, lying on their chest, reassuring them, being as loving as you can possibly imagine, despite the obvious pain that he must have been felt as well, because he was actually wounded while he was sleeping in the ship captain's hat. And he survived this, and he won what was called the Dickin Medal, which is the Animal Award for bravery. And he's a tuxedo cat. He's a beautiful looking lad. But again, there was so much sort of good luck and good feeling towards these feline companions that it's no wonder there were so many laws and superstitions and that people were following to make sure that the ship's cat was the most pampered member of any crew. And I love that.
I do think it's also really interesting that you said about polydactyl cats. So my Bimmy was a polydactyl cat.
I thought of her.
Polydactyl cats were disproportionately killed during the witch trials because people thought it was a sign that them being polydactyl was a sign that they were familiars. And here we are on ships, them thinking polydactyl cats are specifically good luck.
You can imagine sailors saying, look, we know that these cats aren't going to be taken here. We're not like other members of society. We live in a very much a topsy-turvy world. You live on land, we live on the sea. They're going to come with us because where we are, they're exactly what we're wanting. It just shows that sort of that streak of non-conformity that you get among sailors, doesn't it?
I love it. That was a joy to listen to. I really enjoyed every second of it. I love A Cursed Ship and I love Maritime Superstitions. That was wonderful. Thank you.
And we've barely scraped the surface. I'm sure people know loads of others and if you can comment on it, then great. I'd love to hear them as well because I'm learning so much too.
Tim, where can people find you if they want to find you?
They can find me at my YouTube channel, Mr. Cloke History. I'm doing a series at the moment on crime and punishment through time, so you might quite enjoy that. It's called Rapid Revision because it is aimed at people doing their GCSE exams, so school children, really. But I'm told that actually they make quite a nice podcast of their own, and I'm also doing some stuff on the Cold War. But I've got hundreds of short videos on a massive variety of topics, and maybe you'd like to subscribe and help my algorithm along. I'd be really grateful.
Tim, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for listening. And on that note, we shall see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, dears.
G'day, America. It's Tony and Ryan from the Tony and Ryan podcast from Down Under.
This episode is sponsored by Boost Mobile, the newest 5G network in the country.
These guys are no longer the prepaid wireless company you might remember. They've invested billions into building their own 5G towers across America, transforming the carrier into America's fourth major network alongside the other big dogs.
Yep, they're challenging the competitors by working harder and smarter, like this amazing new network they've literally built. They have blazing fast 5G and plans for all the latest devices. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com.